now shift a little bit to talking about the evolution of IWRAW-Asia Pacific as an organization and its programs. So initially, we really emphasized conceptual clarity because that was what was a big gap, it was a big hole. And in conceptual clarity about discrimination, about equality, about substantive equality, etc. But as we went along, then we have moved into areas such as, the whole issue of historic discrimination, corrective measures, substantive equality, and gradually then to the issue of access to justice and what kind of justice. So do you want to just take a few minutes and walk us through that?
As we progressed, if you remember, in 1996, 3 years down the road, we had what we called a strategic planning meeting. You, myself, and Eleanor, who had joined us in 1994, to see what did we achieve in the 3 years. And the Netherlands government that had been funding us until that time also said they wanted an external review or evaluation for them to continue to fund us. And Sunila came and did an external evaluation. But on top of that, then we met, the three of us, in Bangladesh, in Dhaka.
That was 1996 or
Six,
7.
six, 96. And we did a 5-day. Actually, Eleanor took us through the process of evaluating ourselves and what women's groups had requested and shown an interest in. And we said we need to expand into more in-depth skills building. And we thought of doing 2 separate programs, one for South Asia, one for Southeast Asia. And we stationed Eleanor in the Philippines, sitting there and doing a Southeast Asia program. And then to do more skilling, more legal work, bringing the law in much more strongly, understanding the power of the law, as well as the challenges that the law would pose, and using that framework of substance, structure, and culture of the law. And to do that, so we had advocacy, facilitating advocacy, capacity building, and information dissemination. We had 3 components of the program, much more structured. We started doing that, and then from that, other things grew, and we went into then we, after 2 or 3 years, we didn't do the regional focus, but we began to do it more functionally. Capacity building, advocacy, and information dissemination across the board for everybody. And we began to look a lot, we went in depth into conceptual clarity to uh, to achieve gender equality. And we looked in great detail at the various facets of equality and non-discrimination. We needed to debunk certain fallacious understanding of discrimination, like treat likes alike, and that is equality, neutrality is equality, or comparator. If you were treated less favorably than another person, then that was discrimination. And we showed that you didn't need a comparator to be discriminated against. Institutional procedures could be discriminating. Community culture could be discriminating, and we did that institutional inequality framework we used. So first part of it was a lot conceptual clarity that we created, and subsequent to that, of course, as we do this, the law became very significant, and therefore we did tremendous amount of lawyers training, mostly South Asia, and they were all young lawyers. And for me, today I'm being confronted, I'm just digressing a little bit, I hope you don't mind. I'm being confronted with, we need intergenerational feminism. All of you are all old people leading the movement. Where are the young people? There are no young people. So let's have sessions on intergenerational feminism. And in fact, even the staff at IWRAW-Asia Pacific feel that if this history is published and we do some kind of a launching, they want a panel on bringing young feminists into a panel for them to talk about what this feminism means to them as a panel for the launching of this publication. I have not said anything about this, but I'm thinking to myself, when we started in 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, especially where the lawyers were concerned, and even CEDAW orientations, we brought in a lot of young people. People like Madhu were young people at that time. Kulika, Madhu, and all were youngsters that we brought in. And the lawyers that we trained from India and also even Southeast Asia were all young women, young lawyers that we trained. Maybe you and I were still
Older.
with gray hair and all that, but Pramada Rana was 24 years old. And she has given a testimony in the history. She says, I was a novice, Pramadarana says. And she said, you taught me about UN institutions and what could be achieved. I learned from you, she said. So we remember Arzurana, Pramadarana from there.
Yeah.
Even Sapna was a young person, young lawyer at that time. So we brought in all these young people. Today, if we do a panel, I want these young people who were young 25 to 28 years ago to sit down with other young people and tell them their own evolution from being young activists to what they have become today. So we did a lot of, all that I'm trying to say is we did a lot of lawyers training, we did judges meetings, we did colloquiums even then in the 97 and 98 and all that. So the legal part of the program was very critical. We expanded our target group for training. We did programs for government in Mongolia, in Laos, Vietnam. We trained government agencies, Indonesia. We brought them in, not only women's groups, but we brought governments in. So we expanded our target groups for training. So that was another phase of where we had a wider range of people that we approached. But then what we also did was we started beginning to say that we went international. So the global to local came up in 97, and we said we need to link the national level work to the global level work. And so bringing international standards back to the local level. So that whole participating in international, not just standard setting, but interpretation of standards was what was happening through the global to local. CEDAW already had the standards. We are not setting new standards, but the committee was interpreting, and women's shadow reports was helping CEDAW committee interpret those standards, and women were participating at the international level, and they were bringing it back to the local level. So this international outreach was happening. Facts-based advocacy was the other key thrust. So it's not, advocacy cannot just be, we want this, we want that, change this law, we want better health services. No, you needed to give details as to why, what was wrong with the health services. Where was the discrimination in the health services? What do you want changed in the health services? So bring out facts. Who was being left out of the health services and why? And that is where the facilitating the fulfillment of state obligation. And to do this, we prepared methodological frameworks, rights-based approach, monitoring framework for understanding state obligation. So that was one phase where we began to do, you remember those meetings we had? Uh, what was it called? You remember?
Clarifying concepts and something.
Where we developed frameworks. One framework was the CEDAW compliance framework. Remember the CEDAW compliance
Of course,
framework
yes. I remember that very well. We worked till the night.
was done through one of those done to one of those meetings, um, and monitoring framework was done. One rights-based approach was done because what we began to see was people were talking loosely about applying CEDAW. They were saying things like, um, we are using CEDAW framework. They will say we are using CEDAW framework, but if I ask them to explain to me the details of that framework, they are not able to. What would applying CEDAW mean? What would monitoring the fulfillment of state obligation, what elements would there have to be if you are monitoring state obligation under CEDAW? So we brought that nuance in. That was the other part of strengthening. And then in terms of going global, not only was this facilitating the fulfillment had synergy with global to local because it was helping them do their better shadow reports while it monitored state obligation and could go into the shadow reports, and shadow reports would go international. Then we went into working with the year 2000 optional protocol was uh, came into force, and we did a program on optional protocol ratification and use of the optional protocol. And we call it a campaign, our rights are not optional. And we did a lot of trainings of women's groups to help them to persuade their governments to um, ratify the optional protocol. So, and then we also participated in the meetings of the treaty chairs of the treaty bodies, and there was a lot of work that was going on refining, reforming the treaty bodies. So we were working a lot that we'd become truly global and international from the little orientations that we had been doing at the local and national level. So we did a lot of we did one with on general recommendation 25 on uh, what do you call it? Um, Article 4, temporary special measures. We worked on general recommendations relating to access to justice later, but we did on migrant workers, on temporary special measures, on access to health, which was 24. So we did all of that as well. So we became truly global. We had arrived as an international human rights organization, and it had not been easy to get this recognition because it was very difficult to establish ourselves as an international organization. Donors kept sending us, when we requested funding from the international pot of human rights funds, they said, no, but you're based in Asia, so you should go to the regional fund, which is a smaller fund and which is much more a thematic fund. But we had arrived. We were doing, and I said, no, we will continue to be based in. And they said, if you're based in Geneva, donors have actually said to me at that time, this maybe not now they say like that, but at that time they said, if you're based in London, New York, or Geneva, we'll consider you as international. So they were only looking at your location.
Mm.
And I was actually told if you're in New York, London, or Geneva and you work in 4 Asian countries, you're international. And here we had brought more than 100 women into global to local, but based in Asia, you're not international.
Mm.
But we established the nature of our work, we were international. And I said, no, there is no necessity for us to be based in London, Geneva, or New York. I don't want to do that. It's just to get funding. So it's a political stand that you can be a southern based NGO and do international human rights work. This is something that we wanted to establish.
And you did establish that. Donors do recognize that now.
Finally, we established that. Uh, yeah. Now,
Okay.
when we talked about this, one of the questions that was raised, I remember at one of our meetings, one of the strategic planning meetings, is what factors facilitated this growth. At one meeting, it was pointed out by participants at the meeting that we had, because this question was raised at a strategic planning meeting. I think it was in the year, I forget which year that was. And the answer to that was there was in the organization, within the organization, there was dedication, vision, and commitment of all people involved. And one of them pointed out that while I, as the person leading the organization, contributed a great deal, there have been many others who gave time, going without fees, as they did it pro bono. A lot of them, the whole global to local in the beginning few years was implemented by Alda, Ali Miller, Deborah Libovich. People like Alda and Ali Miller planned the whole thing out. They didn't take a cent. We did give them accommodation when they came into New York, but we didn't give them a fee at all. And they gave their time. They didn't take fees. They promoted our agenda. They implemented our work plan even, because they saw that IWRAW-Asia Pacific was not merely a technocratic organization, but that it had a dedicated and political vision. So people were willing to give their time. There were academics, academic lawyers, there were individuals very qualified, there were NGOs. Uh, they did it gratis without taking money. They even when there was shortage of staff, they took on the whole work, because either they were so dedicated they wanted to give their time, or they felt it fed into their own advocacy. They felt it was contributing to the work that they were dedicated to. And it was sheer commitment to IWRAW-Asia Pacific, and they felt an ownership with the goals of IWRAW-Asia Pacific. Somehow we managed to get this kind of commitment from them, and a recognition that these goals are also their own goals in their own organization. And so the program never missed a beat, even when there was a lapse of time in hiring staff. It was this collective involvement, commitment, and contribution that strengthened the dynamism of the program. And it gave IWRAW, we had a collective identity at that time. If you said who is IWRAW Asia Pacific, there was a collective that considered itself as IWRAW Asia Pacific. That collective identity made people give their time. So we fed each other. Our partners and IWRAW Asia Pacific fed each other. There was this synergy between us. It was a very exciting period of time for IWRAW Asia Pacific.